Christine Landry made the biggest mistake of her life on a Tuesday morning, though she wouldn't realize it for months. She left her husband, Robert Johnson, on the same day he won $70 million in the lottery. Same day, 6 hours apart. While she was in a hospital cafeteria signing divorce papers and texting her new boyfriend about finally being free, Robert was standing 40 feet away in the lobby, staring at a lottery confirmation email and wondering if God was testing him or mocking him. Here's the thing about Robert. Everyone knew him as the Mafia boss who controlled half the city's underground trade. Christine knew him as the cold, distant husband who brought danger into their home, who chose his empire over their sick daughter Lily, who seemed incapable of the kind of gentle love she desperately needed. When Dr. Andrew Keller walked into her life, offering safety and stability and a future without bodyguards, she didn't hesitate. She walked away from the mansion, the blood money, the sleepless nights wondering if her husband would come home alive. She even walked away from Lily, convinced Robert's world would destroy their daughter faster than her illness could. But here's what Christine didn't know. Robert had already decided to walk away too. Not from Lily, from everything else. The money he'd just won? It wasn't a prize, it was a mirror, and it was about to show both of them exactly who they'd become. If you're excited to dive into this story, hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us share more amazing stories. And believe me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's jump into the story. Christine's hands trembled as she zipped Lily's overnight bag, her eyes burning from another sleepless night in the pediatric wing of St. Helena's Hospital. Lily lay in the bed beside her, small and fragile, her 8-year-old body connected to monitors that beeped softly in the pre-dawn quiet. The rare heart condition diagnosis had come 14 months ago. The same week, Robert's lieutenant had been murdered in a dockside ambush, and their home had been surrounded by armed guards for 72 hours straight. She'd spent every moment since then balancing hospital vigils with an exhausting performance of normalcy, smiling at nurses while her husband's world bled violence into every corner of their lives, taking calls from private doctors while listening to Robert's muffled phone conversations about shipments and territories and people who'd disappeared. Robert had been there initially, or so she'd thought, but his presence had become a source of terror rather than comfort. He'd stand in Lily's doorway, tattooed arms crossed, expensive suit jacket barely concealing the shoulder holster, his face carved from stone as doctors explained procedures. He'd nod, write checks with more zeros than most people saw in a lifetime, then disappear into phone calls that made nurses nervous and security guards step aside. The mansion they lived in, with its Mediterranean architecture and ocean views, felt less like a home and more like a beautiful prison, one where armed men patrolled the grounds, and Christine never knew if the next knock on the door would bring flowers or a coroner. Andrew had convinced her they needed to plan her exit carefully, that a woman married to Robert Johnson couldn't simply leave, that strategy and timing mattered. She'd met him 6 months ago during one of Lily's specialist consultations. He'd been charming, concerned, asking questions about her well-being instead of just Lily's vitals. He'd listened when she'd broken down about the fear, the isolation, the suffocating weight of being married to a man everyone called the architect because of how carefully he constructed his criminal operations. Andrew had promised her a different life, one where she could sleep without a gun in the nightstand, where her daughter could grow up without learning to recognize the sound of safety clicks and hushed threats. She brewed terrible hospital coffee as the city began to wake outside the window, staring at her phone without really processing what she saw. Robert's last text had come at 2:17 a.m. "Still at the docks. Emergency. Don't wait." She'd stopped waiting months ago, stopped expecting him to share the burden of Lily's illness, stopped hoping he'd choose them over the empire that demanded constant feeding with violence and control. The billboard across the street advertised family vacation packages to places that felt impossibly distant, impossibly innocent. She remembered when she'd first met Robert, when his danger had seemed like strength, when she'd mistaken his power for protection. He'd been captivating, a man who commanded rooms with a glance, who'd pursued her with an intensity that had felt like destiny. But intensity in courtship became suffocation in marriage. The gifts became guilt. The protection became imprisonment. As Lily's illness consumed not just money, but Christine's soul. As the fear of losing her daughter collided with the fear of the life Robert had trapped them in, she'd started planning escape routes the way other mothers planned birthday parties. When Robert finally appeared in the hospital corridor that morning, his presence made two nurses visibly tense. He moved with that careful control he'd perfected, expensive shoes silent on linoleum, his dark suit perfectly pressed despite the fact he'd clearly been awake all night. He barely glanced at Lily's updated medication chart clipped to the doors. Christine was packing Lily's favorite books, moving mechanically through a routine that had become numbingly familiar. And she could feel his assessment from across the room. "This is what we've become," he said quietly, his voice carrying that edge of something she couldn't name, gesturing at the sterile hospital room, the medical equipment that had become their daughter's constant companions, the plastic bag of Lily's belongings that represented the only childhood she'd known. This fear, this waiting. I can't protect her from this. Her hands stilled over Lily's stuffed rabbit. "Robert, the new treatment trial starts next month. The specialist said her heart function could improve if... His words cut like surgical blades, though his volume never rose. "That's all I've heard for months, Christine. If the treatment works, if we can manage the complications, if we can just survive another crisis. I've built an empire on certainties. I don't traffic in hope." She turned to face him, seeing the man she'd married overlaid with the stranger he'd become, or perhaps had always been. "Lily needs you. Both of us, together. The doctor said stability matters, that stress affects her recovery." "Lily needs a father who isn't suffocating under the weight of impossible expectations," he said, and something in his eyes looked almost like pain, if men like Robert Johnson were capable of such things. "I've made arrangements. Andrew Keller is the best pediatric cardiac surgeon in the state. I've already transferred funds to cover Lily's complete care under his supervision." Something cold and sharp settled in Christine's chest. "You've been talking to Andrew about arrangements?" His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "He approached me last week, explained that he could provide Lily superior care, that he'd be willing to take over her case management completely, that he understood the complications of our situation." The way he said situation carried layers of meaning. "He also mentioned he could provide you the kind of life you've been dreaming about, the kind I've apparently failed to give you despite everything I've built." The cruelty underneath his measured words struck like a physical blow. Christine had never discussed leaving with Andrew in terms Robert could have discovered, had been so careful, so strategic. But of course, Robert Johnson, the man who knew everyone's secrets, who built empires on information, would know, would have always known. "I've signed preliminary custody agreements," Robert continued, pulling folded papers from his jacket pocket with practiced ease. "Joint legal custody, but primary physical custody transfers to you once you've established stable housing. Andrew's already offering his home as that stable environment. My attorney will finalize everything by end of business today." "You're just giving up?" She heard the disbelief in her own voice. "On Lily? On us?" "I'm giving you what you want," he said, and for the first time she detected something beneath the ice, something that might have been anguish in a different man. "Freedom from the monster you married, safety from the life that terrifies you, and giving Lily a chance at a father who knows how to save lives instead of taking them." He turned toward the door, then paused, his hand on the frame, his broad shoulders blocking the exit like they'd blocked so many dangers she'd never seen coming. "There's a lottery ticket in my jacket pocket. Bought it this morning at 6:42 from a vending machine downstairs while waiting for Lily's blood work results." Stupid impulse. But I was thinking, if there's such a thing as miracles, maybe they come from gas station vending machines instead of prayers. Then Robert Johnson, the most feared man in the city, walked out of his daughter's hospital room, leaving Christine standing among packed bags and medical charts, holding divorce papers she'd thought she'd have to fight for, unaware that the man she was watching leave had just won $70 million and decided that money couldn't buy back what was already walking away. Andrew Keller's apartment occupied the entire 23rd floor of a glass tower that made Christine feel like she was living inside a diamond. Beautiful, flawless, and utterly cold. Everything was white. White marble countertops, white leather furniture, white orchids in white ceramic vases positioned with the precision of surgical instruments. Even the view through floor-to-ceiling windows seemed bleached of color, the city below reduced to geometric patterns of steel and concrete. "You're safe now," Andrew said for the third time that week, his hand resting on her shoulder with practiced reassurance as she unpacked the few belongings she'd brought from the hospital. "No more looking over your shoulder. No more wondering if today's the day federal agents show up at your door." Christine nodded, folding Lily's drawings into a drawer, trying to ignore how the apartment's silence felt less like peace and more like the held breath before a scream. She'd visited Lily twice since the divorce was finalized. Awkward hours in the hospital room where Robert had been unfailingly polite, distant. His presence somehow smaller than she remembered, as if he'd begun erasing himself even before the papers were signed. "You made the right choice," Andrew continued, moving to pour wine into crystal glasses that probably cost more than her old wedding ring. "For you and for Lily. She needs stability, not the chaos of Robert Johnson's world." The way he said Robert's name carried subtle contempt, as if the syllables themselves were contaminated. Christine accepted the wine, letting the expensive vintage coat her throat, washing down the memory of her final argument with Robert 3 weeks before she'd left. They'd been in the mansion's study, her standing by the door, him behind his desk, always that massive desk between them like a border neither could cross. She'd been crying, though she'd promised herself she wouldn't give him that satisfaction. "You think money fixes everything," she'd said, her voice breaking on the accusation. "That's all you know. Buy better doctors, hire more security, throw cash at problems until they disappear." Robert had looked up from paperwork she'd recognized as property deeds, his dark eyes unreadable in the lamplight. "It's the only thing that ever did," he'd replied, so quietly she'd barely heard him. "Love doesn't stop bullets, Christine. Money does. Love doesn't save dying children. Money does. I learned that lesson young." "Then maybe you learned the wrong lessons," she'd whispered. His only response had been to return his attention to the documents, dismissing her with silence more effectively than words ever could. Andrew's voice pulled her back to the present, to the sterile perfection of her new life. "I've scheduled a consultation with my colleague about Lily's long-term care plan. We should discuss parameters, visiting schedules, medical decision protocols, financial arrangements." "Financial arrangements?" Christine set down her wine glass. "Robert's already covering everything." "With dirty money," Andrew said smoothly, settling beside her on the white couch, close enough that his cologne, expensive, clinical, filled her breathing space. "Eventually, you'll want clean separation from his resources. My practice has excellent payment plans. It's about establishing independence, Christine. Surely you understand that." She did understand. She'd left for exactly this reason. Independence, autonomy, freedom from Robert's world. So why did Andrew's careful explanation feel less like liberation and more like a different kind of contract being drafted around her? Across the city, in a hospital room that had become more home than the mansion he still owned, Robert Johnson sat in the uncomfortable chair beside Lily's bed, reading Where the Wild Things Are for the fourth time that evening. His daughter's small hand rested in his, her breathing steady with medication, her eyes fighting sleep because she wanted to hear the story again. "One more time, Daddy," Lily whispered, her voice thin but determined. "One more time, Princess," he agreed, turning back to the first page, his gravelly voice softening into something almost gentle. His phone buzzed repeatedly on the windowsill. Texts from Marcus Chen, his second in command, each more urgent than the last. Territory disputes, revenue reports, a shipment issue at the docks that required immediate attention. Robert ignored them all, his focus entirely on his daughter's face, watching color slowly return to her cheeks as the new medication protocol took effect. Marcus appeared in the doorway eventually, expensive suit and barely concealed frustration. "Boss, we need to talk. The Alvarez crew is pushing into our territory on the south side. If we don't respond, handle it," Robert said without looking up, turning another page. "Handle it?" Marcus stepped into the room, lowering his voice. "These decisions require your approval. The men are wondering if you're still—" He stopped himself, but the unfinished question hung like smoke. "Still what, Marcus?" Robert finally met his eyes, and something in that gaze made his lieutenant step back instinctively. "Still capable? Still committed? Still the man who built this empire?" "Still interested," Marcus finished carefully. "You've missed 3 meetings, ignored calls from our contacts in Miami. Yesterday you signed off on selling 2 of our most profitable properties without explanation. The crew is nervous. When the boss gets distracted, people start looking for weakness." Robert returned his attention to Lily, his hand steady on the book. "Let them look." "And what should I tell them when they find it?" "Tell them," Robert said softly, "that I'm learning the difference between strength and stupidity." Dismissed. "Marcus." His lieutenant left, and Robert continued reading, his voice never wavering even as he made mental calculations about which assets to liquidate next, which contacts to sever, which bridges to burn on his way out of the underworld. The lottery ticket sat in his wallet, a secret he'd shared with no one, not even his attorney. $70 million that would finance an exit strategy years in the making, an escape route he'd been building long before Christine had left. 3 days later, a newspaper landed on Andrew's white marble counter during breakfast. Christine was preparing coffee, moving carefully through the kitchen as if afraid to disturb the pristine surfaces. Andrew picked up the paper, scanning headlines with the casual attention of someone used to seeing his name in medical journals. He paused on page 3. "Interesting. Someone won the state lottery last month. $70 million. They still haven't come forward publicly. Just filed through a trust attorney." He turned the page. "Says the winning ticket was purchased at St. Helena's Hospital on the morning of September 15th at 6:42 a.m. Christine's hand stilled on the coffee pot. September 15th, the morning she'd signed the divorce papers. The morning Robert had stood in the lobby and made that strange comment about miracles and vending machines. "Probably some desperate family member," Andrew continued, folding the paper away. "Though I'd love to know their secret, picking the right numbers while someone they love is dying upstairs. There's a metaphor there somewhere." He kissed her cheek and left for the hospital, leaving Christine standing in the white kitchen, staring at the discarded newspaper, a cold certainty beginning to crystallize in her chest, like ice forming over still water. Across the city, Robert's attorney read the same headline, recognized the numbers from the photocopy in his secure files, and said absolutely nothing to anyone. The ground beneath two carefully constructed new lives had just begun its imperceptible shift toward collapse. The family court building smelled like old coffee and broken promises. Christine sat beside her attorney, Janet Morrison, a sharp woman in a sharper suit who'd promised to eviscerate Robert Johnson's credibility with documentation of his criminal associations spanning 15 years. Andrew had insisted on the aggressive approach, had even helped Christine compile a folder thick with newspaper clippings about doc violence, federal investigations, and whispered connections to organized crime. "We're not just protecting your rights," Andrew had said the night before, his hand firm on her shoulder in that way that had begun to feel less like support and more like steering. "We're protecting Lily from growing up in a world where people solve problems with violence. You're doing the right thing, Christine." She'd repeated those words to herself all morning, a mantra against the guilt that gnawed at her whenever she remembered Lily's face during their last visit, how her daughter had asked why Mommy didn't stay anymore, why everything had changed so fast. Robert entered the courtroom alone. No entourage, no lawyers flanking him like bodyguards, just a single attorney carrying a slim briefcase. He wore a dark suit, simpler than the expensive Italian cuts she remembered, and he didn't look at her as he took his seat across the aisle. His expression was neutral, almost serene, as if he were attending a business meeting rather than a battle for his daughter. When Janet filed the motion for full custody, citing Robert's dangerous lifestyle and criminal associations as presenting immediate and ongoing risk to the minor child, Christine expected rage, pushback, the legendary ruthlessness everyone whispered about. Instead, Robert's attorney simply stood and said, "My client does not contest the filing. We request the court hear evidence before making final determinations." Christine felt fury bloom in her chest. Doesn't contest? After everything, after all his promises about protecting Lily, he was just going to surrender? She leaned toward Janet, whispering urgently, "What does this mean?" "It means either he's given up," Janet murmured back, "or he knows something we don't." The hearing proceeded with clinical efficiency. Janet presented her case with prosecutorial precision. Photographs of Robert meeting with known criminals, financial records showing transactions through shell companies, testimony from a federal agent confirming Robert Johnson had been under investigation for organized crime activities for over a decade. "This is not a man who provides a safe environment for a child," Janet concluded, her voice ringing with righteous certainty. "This is a man whose very presence invites danger. Ms. Landry is asking this court to protect her daughter from that reality." Robert sat motionless throughout, his hands folded on the table, his face betraying nothing. Christine searched for anger, for the cold fury she'd learned to recognize, but found only stillness. Then Robert's attorney stood. Thomas Brennan was older, grandfatherly, with wire-rimmed glasses and a gentle voice that made the courtroom lean forward to hear him. "Your Honor, everything Ms. Morrison has presented is accurate. My client doesn't dispute his past." He paused, letting that admission settle. "But this case isn't about who Robert Johnson was. It's about who he's become, and more importantly, who has actually been present for Lily Johnson during the most critical period of her young life." He produced documents with quiet efficiency, hospital visitation logs showing Robert present for 87% of Lily's appointments over the past 14 months, compared to Christine's 62% in the months before the separation, dropping to 23% after. Medical decision records showing Robert consulting with specialists, researching treatment options, attending every surgery preparation meeting. "But perhaps most relevant," Brennan continued, sliding another document across to the judge, "is that 3 months ago, my client began the process of liquidating all business holdings that could be connected to illegal activities. He has divested completely from dock operations, dissolved partnerships with questionable associates, and transferred all remaining assets into legitimate business ventures and charitable trusts. Christine's breath caught. 3 months ago. That was before she'd left. Furthermore, Brennan said, his voice growing quieter still, my client has made anonymous donations totaling $5 million to children's cancer research, specifically funding experimental cardiac treatments for pediatric patients who lack insurance coverage or means. The donation was made through an irrevocable trust, meaning even if my client wanted the money back, he couldn't access it. It belongs to sick children now, forever. The courtroom shifted, a palpable change in atmosphere. Christine felt it like weather turning, felt the eyes that had been sympathetic to her cause suddenly reassessing. The judge reviewed documents in silence that stretched like pulled wire. Finally, she looked up, her gaze moving between Christine and Robert. Mr. Johnson, why didn't you contest this filing? Robert stood, and for the first time that day, he spoke. His voice was rough, quiet. Nothing like the commanding presence Christine remembered. Because my daughter's mother has every right to be afraid of who I was, Your Honor. I don't blame her for leaving. I blame myself for taking so long to change. He sat back down, and Christine saw something that made her chest constrict. His hands were shaking slightly, fingers interlaced to hide the tremor. The judge's ruling came swift and decisive. Joint legal custody, primary physical custody temporarily to Robert, given Lily's ongoing medical needs and Christine's extended absences during critical treatment periods. Structured visitation for Christine. Full review in 6 months. This court recognizes that Mr. Johnson is demonstrating genuine reformation, the judge concluded, and that Lily's medical stability requires continuity of care that has been primarily provided by her father. Court adjourned. Christine sat frozen as the courtroom emptied. Humiliation burned through her like acid. She'd expected vindication, had been promised Robert would be exposed as the monster he was, and instead, she'd been painted as the abandoner, the absent mother, while he became the redemption story. This is temporary, Janet said quickly, packing files. We'll document any backsliding, any hint he's returning to old patterns. She failed. Andrew's voice cut through, cold and clipped. He'd been sitting in the back, watching. Now he stood beside Christine, his hand on her elbow, tight enough to bruise. You assured me this would work, Janet. That his past would be enough. His past was enough, Janet countered. His present was better. Outside on the courthouse steps, Christine saw Robert emerge with his attorney. They shook hands, a brief exchange, then Brennan departed. Robert stood alone, checking his phone, and Christine found herself walking toward him before conscious thought engaged. That was quite a performance, she said, her voice sharp with hurt. The reformed criminal, the devoted father. When did you plan all this? Robert looked up, and she saw exhaustion in his eyes that made him look older than his 46 years. I didn't plan it, Christine. I just finally did it. He moved to walk past her, and that's when she noticed his watch. Simple, brushed steel, elegant but understated. Nothing like the ostentatious Rolex he used to wear as a status symbol. This was quieter, deliberate. Expensive in ways that didn't scream wealth, but whispered it. New watch? She said, hating herself for noticing, for caring. New life, he replied. Then he walked away, leaving her standing on the courthouse steps, watching him disappear into the city, unaware that the modest timepiece had cost more than most cars, custom-made by a Swiss craftsman who only accepted clients worth 8 figures or more, purchased in quiet celebration of a lottery win she still didn't know had happened. Andrew's hand closed on her arm again. Come on, we need to strategize the appeal. But Christine stood motionless, watching Robert's retreating figure, the first whisper of doubt beginning to crack through her certainty like light through breaking ice. The warehouse on the South Docks had been Robert's first acquisition, bought with money earned from breaking bones for men who now answered to him. Tonight, he stood in its emptiness, watching Marcus Chen and 3 other lieutenants arrange themselves in a semicircle that felt more like an execution formation than a business meeting. 15 million, Marcus said, his voice echoing off concrete walls. You've invested 15 million in a legitimate logistics company. Clean trucks, legal contracts, union drivers. Do you understand what you're doing? I'm getting out, Robert replied, his hands in his pockets, deliberately casual despite the tension radiating from men who'd killed for less than what he was about to take from them. You don't get out. Marcus stepped closer, and Robert saw the bulge under his jacket. You built this empire on blood. You don't just liquidate it and walk away because your wife left and your conscience suddenly woke up. She's not my wife anymore, Robert said quietly. And my conscience never slept. I just stopped listening to it. The knife came fast, Marcus moving with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before. But Robert had been expecting betrayal since the moment he'd called this meeting. He sidestepped, caught Marcus's wrist, and twisted until the blade clattered to concrete. 2 other men moved, but Robert's voice stopped them cold. I've transferred your shares, he said, breathing hard, still holding Marcus's arm at an angle that could break with minimal pressure. All of you, the dock operations, the transport routes, the real estate holdings I'm liquidating, you'll get your percentages. Legal, clean, through attorneys. You'll be millionaires by next quarter. Marcus stared at him, shock replacing fury. You're buying us out? I'm setting you free. Robert released him, stepped back. Take the money. Go legitimate or stay dirty. I don't care. But I'm done. And if anyone comes after me or my daughter because of what I used to be, you'll discover that leaving the life doesn't mean I've forgotten how to end one. He walked out of the warehouse, his back exposed, half expecting a bullet. It didn't come, but his hands shook the entire drive to the hospital, adrenaline and relief mixing into something that felt almost like rebirth. 3 days later, Lily's monitors began screaming at 2:00 a.m. Robert jolted awake in the chair he'd taken to sleeping in, saw his daughter convulsing, nurses flooding the room. A doctor shouting orders that sounded like a foreign language filtered through terror. They stabilized her after 17 minutes that felt like 17 years. The doctor explained about cardiac episodes, stress on weakened tissue, the possibility that current treatments weren't enough. Robert heard the words through a fog of pure fear. When they finally left him alone with her, tubes and wires making her look more machine than child, Robert Johnson, who hadn't prayed since he was 10 years old watching his mother die in a charity ward, dropped to his knees beside Lily's bed. I don't know if you listen to men like me, he whispered, his forehead pressed against the bed rail. I don't know if I've done too much, hurt too many people for you to care. But she's innocent. She's good. Please don't take her because of what I am. The silence that answered felt both empty and full, like the moment before a verdict. By morning, Robert had his attorney on the phone. I need you to establish another trust. Anonymous. $20 million for experimental cardiac research, specifically targeting Lily's condition. Find the best research hospital in the country and fund whatever trial shows the most promise. 20 million? Thomas Brennan repeated carefully. Whatever it takes, Robert said. And Thomas? Make sure the hospital where Lily's being treated gets access to any breakthrough first. The newspaper article ran 2 weeks later, a small piece on page 6 that Christine almost missed while drinking coffee in Andrew's sterile kitchen. Anonymous donor funds experimental cardiac research, 20 million, gift targets, rare pediatric conditions. She read about the mysterious philanthropist, the groundbreaking treatment protocol now being fast-tracked through FDA approval, the hope it represented for families like hers. Her first thought was gratitude to whatever wealthy stranger had made this possible. Her second was wondering if Robert had heard about it, if it might help Lily. She never thought to connect the dots between them. "You're reading about miracles?" Andrew's voice carried an edge as he entered the kitchen, already dressed for the hospital despite the early hour. "While we're drowning in practical realities?" Christine folded the paper. "It's about a treatment that could help Lily." "Everything is about Lily," he snapped, then caught himself, smoothed his expression into something apologetic. "I'm sorry. I'm dealing with some financial pressures at the practice. Hospital board audits, administrative complications. It's making me tense." "What kind of complications?" Christine asked, but Andrew was already moving toward the door. "Nothing you need to worry about, though." He paused, as if the thought had just occurred to him. "Robert must have substantial assets still, from his criminal enterprises. The court awarded you joint custody. Surely that entitles you to financial disclosures, maybe compensation for years of his illegal earnings that put you at risk." Christine felt something cold settle in her stomach. "I don't want his money." "It's not about wanting." Andrew's voice took on that carefully reasonable tone she'd begun to recognize as manipulation wrapped in logic. "It's about what you're owed, what Lily's owed. He put your daughter in danger every day with his lifestyle. That has a price." He left before she could respond. Christine sat in the white kitchen, surrounded by luxury she hadn't earned, and realized Andrew had never once asked how much money Robert actually had, as if he'd already done research, already calculated her worth. That night, she heard him on the phone through the bedroom door. His voice carried anger she'd never heard directed at her, but recognized from the way Robert used to sound during business calls. The tone of a man used to control who'd suddenly lost it. "I don't care about their investigation," Andrew hissed. "The accounts are clean. They won't find anything if you did what I paid you to." He stopped abruptly, then, "Just handle it. I've got too much invested to let some hospital ethics committee destroy everything now." Christine stood frozen in the hallway, her hand on the doorknob, remembering whispers she'd dismissed. Nurses mentioning billing irregularities, a colleague who'd mentioned Andrew's unusually high success rate with wealthy patients, the way he'd pushed certain expensive procedures that insurance rarely covered. She backed away quietly, returned to the living room, and stared out at the city lights, beginning to understand that she'd escaped one dangerous man only to move in with another who simply wore his violence in spreadsheets instead of shoulder holsters. The newspaper with the article about the anonymous donor sat on the coffee table. Christine picked it up again, reading the details she'd skimmed before, and felt the first tremor of recognition she wasn't quite ready to name. $20 million. For children with Lily's specific condition. Funded anonymously 3 weeks after the custody hearing. Channeled through a trust attorney named Thomas Brennan. Robert's attorney was named Thomas Brennan. The coincidence felt too precise to be coincidence at all. The letter arrived on official hospital letterhead, delivered by courier to Andrew's apartment, with the kind of urgency that made Christine's hands shake as she signed for it. Andrew was in surgery, wouldn't be home for hours, and she told herself that opening his mail was justified by the circumstances, by the late-night phone calls and whispered conversations that had become their new normal. "Dr. Andrew Keller, this is formal notification that the Medical Ethics Board has initiated a comprehensive audit of your billing practices for the period of January 2023 through present. You are required to appear." The words blurred together, but certain phrases stood out like accusations. Irregularities in patient billing, unnecessary procedures, potential fraud, insurance manipulation. Christine set the letter down with trembling fingers, her mind scrolling back through the past months with the clarity of someone finally willing to see. 6 weeks after she'd moved in, Andrew had held her grandmother's pearl necklace up to the light, admiring it with the appreciation of someone pricing inventory. "These are beautiful," he'd said. "Vintage?" "My grandmother's. The only thing of value I took from the house. You should consider selling them," he'd suggested casually, too casually. "I'm expanding my private practice, offering specialized cardiac care. The startup costs are substantial, but the returns would be significant. You could be an investor, Christine, a partner in building something that could actually help children like Lily." She'd sold the pearls the next week. Then her car, the sedan Robert had bought her years ago, paid off and reliable. Andrew had convinced her she didn't need it in the city, that ride shares were more practical, that the money would be better invested in medical technology that saved lives. "You're thinking like a partner now," he'd praised, kissing her forehead. "Not like a victim of your circumstances." The money was gone. All of it. Invested in a practice now under investigation for fraud. Christine stood in Andrew's pristine apartment, their apartment, though it had never felt like hers, and saw it clearly for the first time. Not a sanctuary, a showroom. Everything designed to impress, to seduce, to convince her she'd traded up from danger to security. But glass was still glass, no matter how expensive, and she was standing in a house that was about to shatter. She called the hospital. Her visit with Lily wasn't scheduled until next week, but suddenly, waiting felt impossible, like suffocating. "I'm coming to see my daughter," she told the nurse. "Today. Now." The hospital corridor felt both familiar and foreign, a place she'd once inhabited daily that now felt like revisiting a past life. Christine approached Lily's room with her heart hammering, unsure what she'd find, unsure what she even hoped for. Robert's voice stopped her at the door. Low, gentle, reading with the careful cadence of someone who'd practiced making words soft. "And Max, the king of all wild things, was lonely and wanted to be where someone loved him best of all." Christine peered through the window. Robert sat in the chair she used to occupy, Lily tucked against his side, the book spread across both their laps. His tattooed forearms, those marks of violence she'd feared for years, cradled their daughter with infinite tenderness. And Lily was smiling. Actually smiling, her thin face lit with something Christine hadn't seen in months. Joy. The fire that used to burn in Robert's eyes, that dangerous intensity that had drawn and terrified her in equal measure, was gone. In its place was something calmer, deeper, purpose without fury, strength without violence. Robert looked up, saw her through the glass. For a moment, neither moved. Then he said something to Lily, who turned, saw her mother, and her smile widened even as uncertainty crossed her features. Christine entered like someone approaching something sacred, afraid of disturbing it. "Mommy!" Lily's voice was stronger than Christine remembered, months of treatment showing results she hadn't been present to witness. "Hi, baby." Christine knelt beside the bed, taking Lily's small hand, fighting tears. "I'm sorry I haven't visited more." "Daddy said you were busy getting settled," Lily said with the diplomatic simplicity of children repeating what they've been told. "But I made you pictures. Daddy hung them up so I could see them." Christine looked where Lily pointed, a bulletin board covered with drawings, most featuring 3 stick figures labeled Mommy, Daddy, and me, in a house that looked suspiciously like the mansion Christine had left. "I'll make tea," Robert said quietly, standing. "Lily's allowed chamomile now. Her heart's responding well to the new protocol." "New protocol?" Christine watched him move to the small kitchenette area, noting how he knew exactly where everything was, how this space had become his. Experimental treatment. Came available 3 weeks ago through some anonymous research funding. He poured hot water with the careful attention of someone who'd done this hundreds of times. Her ejection fraction is up 12%. Dr. Wu says if this continues, she might not need the transplant they were discussing. He handed Christine a mug, their fingers not quite touching. She still asks about you every night, Robert said, his voice carrying no accusation, just statement of fact. I tell her you're finding your way back. I didn't. Christine stopped, unsure what she was trying to say. I didn't know. I didn't see. I didn't understand. You look tired, Robert observed, and it wasn't criticism, but concern. Are you sleeping? The question was so simple, so ordinary, so utterly unlike anything the old Robert would have asked, that Christine felt something crack inside her chest. Not really. He nodded, as if he understood more than she'd said. The couch in the corner converts to a bed. Hospital policy allows parents to stay overnight now. If you wanted to. Before Christine could respond, Lily tugged her hand. Can you stay, Mommy? Daddy reads good stories, but I missed your voice. Christine stayed until Lily fell asleep, reading and rereading favorite books while Robert worked quietly on a laptop in the corner. Not criminal business, she realized, but legitimate company emails, budget spreadsheets, the boring administrative work of legal enterprise. When she finally stood to leave, Robert walked her to the door. Lily had pressed a folded drawing into her hand before drifting off. Christine opened it in the hallway. A crayon house. 3 stick figures. Mom, come home, written in Lily's careful letters. She means the hospital, Robert said softly behind her. Not the mansion, not the old life, just wherever we both are. Christine looked at him, really looked. Maybe for the first time since she'd decided to leave. The tattoos were still there, permanent reminders of who he'd been. But the man wearing them was different, quieter, gentler, present in ways the old Robert never had been. How did you change so much? She whispered. I had to lose everything to remember what mattered. He held her gaze, and she saw no anger in it, no resentment, just peaceful acceptance. The question is whether you'll figure that out before it's too late. He went back into Lily's room, leaving Christine standing in the corridor, clutching their daughter's drawing, her carefully constructed new life crumbling like the house of glass it had always been. The attorney's office overlooking the harbor represented everything Robert Johnson had never been. Legitimate, transparent, purposeful. Thomas Brennan spread architectural renderings across the mahogany conference table. Glass walls, natural light, child-sized furniture designed to comfort rather than intimidate. The Lily Johnson Pediatric Wing, Thomas said, pointing to the elegant lettering in the mock-up. 42 treatment rooms, 6 surgical suites, research facilities for experimental cardiac protocols. Total cost, $38 million. Robert studied the drawings with the same intensity he'd once used to examine territorial maps and shipping manifests. But now he was building instead of taking, creating instead of controlling. When can we break ground? 3 months, pending final permits. The hospital board is thrilled, though they're curious about the donor's identity. The press coverage alone has been extraordinary. Through the window, Robert could see the city he'd once ruled through fear. Now he was changing it through something more powerful. Hope wrapped in anonymity. The lottery win had given him not just money, but the ability to rebuild himself from the foundation up, to become the man Christine had needed him to be, even if she'd left before the transformation was complete. "Keep my name out of it until the opening," Robert said. "Let the work speak first." Across the city, in an apartment that felt increasingly like a trap, Christine signed her name on forms that might as well have been written in blood. Andrew's legal fees had exceeded $200,000. The ethics investigation had expanded into criminal fraud charges, and somehow, she'd become responsible for his debts. "This is temporary," Andrew said, pacing behind her like a restless predator. His charm had evaporated weeks ago, replaced by barely controlled rage. "Once I'm exonerated, we'll recover everything. But right now, I need you to sign." "Andrew, I don't have this kind of money." "Then get it from Robert." His voice cracked like a whip. "You think he's really gone legitimate? Men like that don't change. He's hiding assets, probably millions, and you're entitled to half of everything he acquired during your marriage." Christine's hand trembled over the signature line. "His attorney said he liquidated everything, that he's living off investment income now." "And you believe that?" Andrew laughed, bitter and harsh. "Christ, Christine, you're so desperate to see him as the villain that you can't recognize he's playing you. The reformed criminal routine, the devoted father act, it's all designed to make you look like the bad guy while he protects his fortune." She signed the papers because she didn't know what else to do, because the man she'd chosen as her savior had revealed himself as another kind of prison guard, because returning to Robert felt like admitting she'd destroyed her family for nothing. The newspaper coverage started small, local interest pieces about a mysterious philanthropist transforming pediatric care. Then regional medical journals picked it up. Then national news networks began investigating the ghost donor whose contributions were reshaping children's health care across 3 states. Robert watched the coverage from Lily's hospital room, his daughter sleeping peacefully beside him, her monitors showing steady improvement. The experimental treatment funded by his anonymous donation was working. Her heart was healing. That was the only headline that mattered. "Mr. Johnson?" A nurse appeared in the doorway, young and nervous. "There are reporters downstairs asking about the new pediatric wing. Someone leaked that the hospital is naming it after your daughter." Robert nodded slowly. The anonymity was ending, but on his terms, at his timing. "Tell them we'll make a statement at the groundbreaking ceremony next month." "Are you ready for that? The publicity?" He looked at Lily, at the peaceful expression on her face that had replaced the pain-etched fear of months ago. "I'm ready for whatever comes." Christine saw the preliminary news coverage on Andrew's laptop. An article about massive charitable donations linked to St. Helena's Hospital. Speculation about the donor's identity. Mentions of a groundbreaking ceremony scheduled for the new Lily Johnson pediatric wing. "Lily Johnson," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. Andrew appeared behind her, reading over her shoulder. "Probably some wealthy family with a sick kid named Lily, trying to buy good karma." His tone dripped contempt. "Rich people love naming buildings after themselves." But Christine was scrolling through the article, finding the details. Anonymous trust established 4 months ago, administered by Thomas Brennan, donations totaling over $40 million specifically for pediatric cardiac research and treatment facilities. 4 months ago, right after the custody hearing, Thomas Brennan, Robert's attorney. The lottery article she'd read months ago flashed through her memory. $70 million, ticket purchased at St. Helena's Hospital on September 15th at 6:42 a.m., the morning she'd filed for divorce. "It's him," she said, her voice barely audible. "Robert. He won the lottery. He's the donor. All of it. The research funding, the treatment protocol that saved Lily, The new wing? It's all Robert. Andrew's expression shifted from confusion to calculation to fury in rapid succession. 70 million? And you divorced him? You stupid… He caught himself, but the damage was done. The mask finally shattered completely. Christine stood, backing away from him, from the laptop, from the wreckage of her choices. I need to leave. Leave? Andrew's laugh was ugly. You've signed your name on $200,000 of my debt. You're not going anywhere until this is resolved. I'll sell everything I have left. You don't have anything left! His shout made her flinch. I made sure of that. You're trapped here, Christine. Just like I've been trapped by your ex-husband's reputation ruining my practice, by your daughter's medical drama destroying my life, by your… She didn't hear the rest. She was already moving toward the bedroom, throwing clothes into a bag she'd never fully unpacked, calling a cab, understanding with crystalline clarity that she'd traded one prison for another. Except Robert's had always been gilded with genuine protection, while Andrew's was lined with broken glass and false promises. The cab pulled away from the glass tower as the sun set, turning the building into a mirror that reflected nothing back but emptiness. Christine watched it disappear, Robert's words echoing. The question is whether you'll figure that out before it's too late. She'd figured it out. She just prayed it wasn't already too late. The small apartment Christine had rented after leaving Andrew smelled like fresh paint and regret. It was nothing. A studio in a neighborhood that straddled the line between transitional and neglected. But it was hers, paid for with money borrowed from her sister and what remained of her pride. She'd been living there for 2 weeks, sleeping on an air mattress, eating takeout, and avoiding mirrors that might show her the truth about what she'd become. The television was her only furniture besides the mattress, an old flat screen she'd salvaged from storage. She turned it on for noise more than company, flipping through channels while microwaving instant noodles, trying not to think about the groundbreaking ceremony happening across town. The Lily Johnson Pediatric Wing, her daughter's name on a building she'd had no part in creating. Then the local news anchor's voice cut through her distraction. We're going live now to St. Helena's Hospital for a major announcement regarding the mysterious philanthropist whose donations have transformed pediatric care across the region. Christine's hand stilled on her coffee mug. The camera panned across a crowd gathered in front of the hospital. Doctors in white coats, families with children, city officials, reporters jostling for position. A podium had been set up near the construction site, surrounded by architectural renderings and flowering plants. The morning sun caught the windows of the hospital behind them, turning glass into gold. Then the camera found him. Robert Johnson stood center stage, but nothing about him matched the man Christine had known. No entourage of dangerous men. No aggressive posture telegraphing threat. He wore a simple dark suit. No jewelry except that understated watch she'd noticed months ago. And holding his hand, healthy and smiling in a yellow dress that matched the sunshine, was Lily, their daughter, walking, standing, alive in ways Christine had been too absent to witness. The coffee mug slipped from Christine's fingers, hitting the floor, ceramic shattering like her understanding of reality. Ladies and gentlemen, the hospital director was saying, it is my profound honor to introduce the man whose unprecedented generosity has made this dream possible, the anonymous donor who has contributed over $70 million to pediatric cardiac research and treatment facilities. Please welcome Robert Johnson. The number hit Christine like a physical blow. 70 million, the lottery. September 15th. The morning she'd signed divorce papers while he'd folded a winning ticket into his jacket pocket and said nothing, revealed nothing, hidden everything while she'd walked away, convinced she was escaping poverty. Robert stepped to the microphone, Lily still holding his hand. He looked nervous, an expression Christine had never seen on his face in 15 years of marriage. The feared Mafia boss, who'd commanded rooms with a glance, now seemed almost vulnerable under the weight of cameras and attention. "I'm not good at speeches," he began, his rough voice carrying across the crowd. "So I'll keep this simple. 5 years ago, my daughter was diagnosed with a condition that money couldn't fix. I'd spent my whole life believing power could solve any problem. That if you controlled enough, threatened enough, paid enough, you could bend reality to your will." He paused, looking down at Lily, who squeezed his hand encouragingly. "I was wrong. The only thing my power did was drive away the people I loved and teach my daughter to fear the man who was supposed to protect her. When Lily got sick, I realized I'd built an empire on sand. All my money, all my control. It meant nothing if I lost her." Christine sank to the floor, unable to look away from the screen, tears streaming down her face. "Then something impossible happened," Robert continued. "On the worst morning of my life, the morning my wife left me because I'd become someone unworthy of love, I bought a lottery ticket. Just a stupid distraction while waiting for test results. And I won. $70 million. More money than I'd made in 15 years of criminal enterprise. And I earned it by pure chance while my world was ending." The crowd was silent, transfixed. "I didn't tell anyone, not my family, not my associates, because for the first time in my life, I wanted to see who would stay when the money disappeared. I wanted to see if I could become someone worth staying for." The apartment door burst open behind Christine, Andrew's voice cutting through. "Christine, we need to talk. The police are—" He stopped, seeing her on the floor, surrounded by broken ceramic, staring at the television. Then he saw what she was watching, saw Robert Johnson on screen, heard the announcement about $70 million, and his face went white. "No," Andrew breathed. "No, that's not possible. You said he was broke. You said—" Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. Official voices. "Dr. Andrew Keller, we have a warrant for your arrest for medical fraud, insurance manipulation, and embezzlement." But Christine didn't turn around. She kept her eyes on the screen, on Robert, on Lily, on the life she'd thrown away. "I once believed power could buy life," Robert was saying, his voice cracking slightly with emotion. "But it was love that saved my daughter, and losing everything, my wife, my reputation, my empire, that's what saved me. This building isn't named after Lily because I'm trying to buy redemption. It's named after her because she taught me what real strength looks like. It looks like a little girl fighting for every breath while her father finally learns how to be gentle." The crowd erupted in applause. Reporters shouted questions. Lily hugged her father's leg, beaming at the cameras, healthy and whole, and surrounded by love Christine should have been part of. Behind her, Andrew was being handcuffed, protesting, blaming. His carefully constructed facade crumbling as officers read him his rights. But Christine heard it all from a distance, through water, through the sound of her own weeping. On screen, Robert lifted Lily in his arms, easily, naturally, the way he'd clearly been doing for months, and carried her toward the hospital, ignoring the press of reporters, focused entirely on his daughter. Just before the camera cut away, Lily looked directly at the lens, waved her small hand, and Christine imagined for one impossible moment that her daughter could see her through the screen, could see her mother finally understanding what she'd lost. The news anchor returned, beginning analysis of the shocking revelation. But Christine was no longer listening. She sat in her empty apartment, surrounded by the ruins of her choices, watching her phone ring with her sister's number, probably calling to make sure she'd seen the broadcast. She didn't answer. She just sat in the wreckage. Finally seeing clearly, finally understanding that redemption had been happening all around her while she'd been too busy running toward illusions to notice the miracle standing right in front of her. The man she'd called a monster had become a saint, and she'd been too blind to watch the transformation. The envelope arrived 3 days after the broadcast, slipped under Christine's apartment door by a courier who didn't wait for a signature. Plain white paper, no return address, her name written in handwriting she would have recognized anywhere. Strong, deliberate strokes that somehow managed to be both harsh and careful at once. She stared at it for an hour before finding the courage to open it, sitting cross-legged on her air mattress, the envelope resting in her lap like something that might detonate. Outside, the city moved through afternoon routines, traffic, voices, the ordinary soundtrack of lives that hadn't been demolished by their own choices. Finally, she tore the seal. The letter inside was handwritten on simple notebook paper, the kind Lily used for homework. No expensive stationery, no legal letterhead, just Robert's words in blue ink that occasionally smudged as if he'd paused often while writing. Christine, I don't hate you. I need you to know that first, before anything else. I understand why you left. I was a dangerous man who brought violence into our home, who chose power over presence, who taught our daughter to recognize the sound of guns being loaded instead of bedtime stories being read. You had every right to run. I just wish you'd stayed long enough to see the man I was becoming, not the one I used to be. I bought that lottery ticket at 6:42 in the morning on September 15th. By 6:47, I knew I'd won $70 million. By noon, you'd filed for divorce. I could have told you. Could have used the money to convince you to stay, to prove I could provide the security you wanted. But I realized something in that hospital lobby, standing between a winning ticket and losing my family. If the only thing keeping you was money, then I'd already lost what mattered. I wanted to become someone worth staying for. Not because of what I could buy, but because of who I could be. It took losing you to understand that the empire I'd built was just another prison, one I'd constructed for myself. Lily asks about you every night. She's getting stronger. The treatments are working. The ones I funded through the foundation because I finally understood that some problems can't be solved with threats or control, only with genuine care and patience. She draws pictures of our family, all 3 of us together, and I hang them above her bed because I don't want her to forget what hope looks like. When you're ready to see her, she'll be waiting. So will I. I won't try to convince you to come back. I won't offer money or promises or anything except this. I'm different now. Not perfect, not without scars from who I used to be, but different in ways that matter. The door is open. It always has been. Robert Christine read the letter 7 times until the words blurred together, until her tears had stained the paper, until she'd memorized every line. Then she folded it carefully, placed it in her pocket, and walked out of her apartment without bothering to lock the door behind her. The hospital was 40 minutes away by bus. She spent the entire ride staring out the window, Robert's words circling through her mind. You never waited long enough to see. She'd been so certain, so convinced that leaving was survival, that Robert was incapable of change, that the man who'd built an empire on violence couldn't possibly transform into someone gentle. She'd been so focused on escaping who he was that she'd never considered who he might become. The pediatric wing was still under construction, but the main hospital looked exactly as she remembered. Those same glass doors she'd walked through hundreds of times when Lily was first diagnosed, when every day felt like holding her breath underwater. Lily's room was on the 4th floor. Christine's legs felt unsteady as she approached, her heart hammering so hard she wondered if the nurses could hear it echoing down the corridor. She stopped outside the door, hand raised to knock, and froze. Through the window, She could see them. Robert was helping Lily walk, supporting her with one arm while she pushed her IV stand with determined concentration. Her daughter, her baby, was taking careful steps, her thin legs growing stronger with each movement. Lily's face was scrunched in focus, then broke into a triumphant smile as she made it from the bed to the window and back. 7 steps, Lily announced proudly. That's a new record, Daddy. You're getting so strong, Princess, Robert said, his voice carrying that gentleness Christine had heard in the broadcast, that impossible softness from a man who'd once spoken primarily in threats and orders. Pretty soon you'll be running. Will Mommy come see me run? The question drove through Christine's chest like a blade. Robert crouched down to Lily's level, careful not to disturb her IV line. I hope so, baby. I sent her a letter. When she's ready, she'll come. What if she's not ready? Lily's voice was small, uncertain. Then we'll wait, Robert said simply, and keep getting stronger, and keep hoping. That's what love does. It waits, even when it's hard. Christine couldn't stop herself. She pushed open the door, tears already streaming down her face, unable to speak, barely able to breathe. Robert looked up, met her eyes across the room. There was no anger in his gaze, no resentment, no trace of the cold fury she'd learned to fear. Just quiet forgiveness, patient acceptance, and something that looked almost like relief. Mommy! Lily's shout was pure joy, and she tried to run before Robert caught her gently. Careful, Princess. Let me unhook you first. But Christine was already moving, crossing the room in 3 steps, falling to her knees beside Lily's IV stand, pulling her daughter into her arms with desperate tenderness. I'm sorry, she sobbed into Lily's hair. I'm so sorry, baby. I didn't know. I didn't see. That's the tragedy, Christine, Robert said softly, standing slowly, giving them space while remaining close enough to steady Lily if needed. You never waited long enough to. His words weren't accusation. They were simply truth, delivered without malice. The way someone might comment on rain or traffic, just a statement of what was and what might have been. Christine looked up at him through her tears, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. The tattoos were still there, permanent markers of who he'd been, but the man wearing them had transformed into someone she barely recognized, someone patient, gentle, present in ways she'd never imagined possible. I saw the broadcast, she managed to say. The $70 million, the foundation, everything you've done. I didn't do it for recognition, Robert replied. I did it because I finally learned what matters. Unfortunately, I learned it the same day you decided you were done teaching me. Lily looked between her parents, confusion mixing with hope on her young face. Are you staying, Mommy? Daddy has a couch that turns into a bed. We can all be together. Christine met Robert's eyes, seeing the question there that he wouldn't voice, the door he'd left open without pressure or expectation. Can I stay? She whispered. Just for today? You can stay as long as you need, Robert said. The door's always been open, Christine. You're the one who has to decide whether to walk through it. The hospital garden had been redesigned with foundation money. Robert's money, Christine reminded herself, still adjusting to that reality. Accessible pathways wound through butterfly-attracting flowers, benches positioned in sunlight, a small fountain that made Lily giggle every time the water caught the light. It was mid-October, the air crisp enough to require jackets, but warm enough that the sunshine felt like a blessing. Lily walked between them, holding both their hands, her steps uncertain but growing stronger. The IV pole had been left behind 3 weeks ago, replaced by oral medications and cautious optimism from doctors who'd stopped using words like terminal and started using phrases like long-term management and excellent prognosis. "Can I run?" Lily asked, looking up at Robert with the question she'd been asking every day since her legs had remembered their strength. "Gentle run," Robert agreed. "Stay where we can see you." Lily took off toward the fountain with all the energy of childhood reclaimed, her laughter spilling across the garden like music. Christine watched her daughter chase sunlight between flower beds, her yellow dress bright against autumn colors, and felt something break open in her chest. Not pain this time, but something closer to awe. "She's beautiful," Christine whispered. "She's alive," Robert replied, and the weight he gave those 2 words carried months of fear survived, prayers answered, transformations earned through suffering. They walked in silence for a moment, maintaining distance between them. Not hostile, but careful, like 2 people learning a new language after years of miscommunication. "I want to help," Christine said finally, the words she'd been rehearsing for days tumbling out with desperate sincerity. "With her care, with the appointments and medications and everything you've been managing alone. I want to be here, Robert, for Lily, for—" She hesitated. "For us, if there's still an us to be here for." Robert stopped walking, turned to face her fully. Lily was still visible, still safe, splashing her hands in the fountain with careful delight. When he spoke, his voice carried the gentle firmness of a decision already made. "Christine, I appreciate that, and Lily needs you, not as someone who helps with logistics, but as her mother. You'll always be welcome in her life, but there is no us anymore. Not the way you're hoping." The rejection hurt less than it should have. Maybe because Christine had known it was coming. Maybe because she'd finally started understanding she deserved it. "I made mistakes," she started, but Robert shook his head. "We both did. I became a monster and expected you to live with the consequences. You left when staying felt impossible. Neither of us was wrong for surviving the best way we knew how." He paused, choosing his words with the same care he used for everything now. "But you left to escape danger. I left danger to protect love. We're not the same anymore." "Christine, we're not even heading in the same direction." "I could change direction," she offered weakly. "You shouldn't have to." Robert's expression softened with something that looked like genuine kindness. "You deserve someone who makes you feel safe without you having to wonder if it's real. Someone who doesn't carry the history I do, the violence I can't erase just because I stopped participating in it. I'll always be the man who hurt people, who built an empire on fear. I'm making amends, but I can't unmake the past. You're not that man anymore." "I'm exactly that man," Robert corrected gently. "I've just learned to be other things too. But you'll always look at me and see what I was, and I'll always look at you and remember that you left when I needed you to stay. That's not anger. It's just truth. We can co-parent. We can be kind to each other. We can give Lily the gift of parents who respect each other even if they can't be together. But we can't go back." Lily ran toward them, breathless and beaming. "Did you see me? I ran the whole circle." "We saw, Princess." Robert scooped her up carefully, mindful of her still healing body. "You're getting so fast." "Fast like Daddy's cars used to be," Lily said innocently. And Christine saw Robert's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. A reminder that some memories never fully fade, no matter how much transformation occurs. 6 months later. Christine wore scrubs now, pale blue cotton that marked her as a hospital volunteer rather than a visitor. She worked 3 days a week in the pediatric wing, reading to children whose parents couldn't be present, organizing activities, offering the kind of support she wished someone had given her during Lily's darkest days. It wasn't penance, or maybe it was, but it had become something more meaningful than guilt. It had become purpose. She saw Robert occasionally during his visits with Lily, their interactions cordial and brief. He'd smile, ask how she was doing, share updates about the Foundation's expansion into international partnerships. He was funding pediatric cardiac facilities in 7 countries now, had been featured in Time magazine as one of the year's most impactful philanthropists, had somehow become more powerful through generosity than he'd ever been through violence. Lily lived with Robert in a new house. Not the mansion, which he'd sold, but something smaller, warmer, with a garden where she could play and neighbors who didn't need armed security to feel safe. Christine visited every Tuesday and Saturday, scheduled times that Lily looked forward to with drawings prepared and stories rehearsed. One Saturday in April, they met at the newly opened Lily Johnson Pediatric Wing, completed on schedule, gleaming with the kind of hope that Robert's money had purchased, but his transformation had truly funded. Lily wanted to see her name on the building, wanted to understand why her father had named something so important after her. "Because you saved me," Robert explained, kneeling to her level in the lobby where he'd once bought a lottery ticket and won more than money. "When you got sick, you taught me what really matters. This building is here because of you." "Not because you won the lottery?" Lily asked with the literal honesty of 9-year-old logic. "The lottery gave me money," Robert said. "You gave me a reason to use it well." Christine watched from a few feet away, no longer part of their immediate circle but still within their orbit, close enough to matter, distant enough to heal. Lily turned, saw her mother, and reached out her hand. "Mommy, come see. They have a playroom with my name on it." Christine took one hand. Robert took the other. And together, they walked through the building that symbolized transformation. Not back to what they'd been, but forward to what they'd each become separately. Lily between them, healthy and whole, and held by 2 parents who'd learned that love doesn't always mean staying together. Sometimes it means letting go. Sometimes it means rebuilding separately so you can stand together without collapsing. In the end, love wasn't lost. It just lived where regret couldn't reach, in a little girl's laughter, in hospital wings that saved children who'd never know the donor's name, in 2 broken people who'd learned that redemption doesn't erase the past, but can build a different future. And in the space between what was and what remained, there was finally peace.